Well, okay, thank you so much for being here. My name is Pedro Iser. I am Executive Director at CESCOS, a think tank based in Montevideo, Uruguay. Welcome to the conference, Liberalism and the Free Society in 2021, a conversation with Brother Lips, which is co-organized by Universidad del SEMA, based in Buenos Aires, University based in Buenos Aires, the Atlas Network, Instituto Juan de Mariana, which is a think tank based in Madrid, and we, CESCOS. So, well, the question is, what is a real state of freedom? Is it as threatened as many of us suspect, or is it simply the permanent temptation that some humans always have to command and direct the lives of other humans? It is possible to argue that in the West, particularly in the US, there is an unprecedented threat from identity politics. Indeed, there are some sophisticated authoritarian processes which have learned from the totalitarian failures of the recent past. As Brad Lieb says, in 2021, the world is emerging from an extraordinary health crisis, as we all know, and it now confronts an extraordinary freedom crisis. Before introducing Brad, I would like to give the floor to Edgardo Zablowski, Dean at Universidad del SEMA and Director of the Friedman Hayek Center for the Study of a Free Society. Edgardo, please.
Thank you, Pedro. If you to add, first, thank you once again to invite me to be here today. For someone like myself who lives in Buenos Aires, Argentina, freedom, liberty is just, an imaginary state. Here we have a Leviathan who every day we can feel it. It's just amazing. It's very difficult to describe the situation. Well, as Pedro said, I am the president, the director of Universidad del SEMA in Buenos Aires, a university through that, from the beginning, promote the debate with absolute freedom of thought. And I am also executive director of USEMA Friedman Hayek Center for the study of the free society. This is quite new, and we are partners of Atlas Network since last July. Well, few to say, thank you very much once again, and I don't like to take many more of your time. I prefer to listen up Brad than go on talking. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edgardo. So, thank you very much. Please let me briefly introduce Brad. Brad Liebs is the CEO of Atlas Network, an organization that increases opportunity and prosperity by strengthening a global network, as we all know, of independent civil society organizations that promote individual freedom and remove barriers to human flourishing. He's the author of this book, Liberalism and the Free Society, in 2020, as well as another essay titled The Freedom Movement, Its Past, Present, and Future. Brad is a member of the John Templeton Foundation, Templeton World Charity Foundation, and Templeton Religion Trust. Brad is a member of the Mont Pelerin Society. His work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Regulation, National Review Online, The Daily Caller, Forbes, Fox News, American Spectator, American Thinker, and Real Clear Politics. Brad received his MBA from Emory University and his BA from Princeton University. Brad, thank you very much for being here. Such a honor for us. Please.
Oh, thank you very much, Pedro, and also to Edgardo and Jose Carlos, and to this broader audience. Oh, sorry. I think if others could mute, that would be great. Yeah, I'm just delighted that we have many friends of CESCO in Uruguay and USEMA in Argentina, so Juan de Mariana in Spain. I'm glad you've joined today, and I'm very thankful that we're doing this in English because mi español es muy mal, and I appreciate you indulging me in this way. As Pedro mentioned, I've been involved with Atlas Network for more than 20 years now. Many of you know that Atlas is an organization that works globally to advance free society principles that offer the world a greater hope for a future of peace and inclusive prosperity. And I originally started on this book project, recognizing that Atlas was hitting a milestone, a 40th anniversary in 2021. But as the severity of the pandemic revealed itself, it became, I think, much more important to rethink this project, and it became much more about the present and future than it is about the past. I do believe that what Pedro said at the beginning is right, that there's a global health crisis, obviously, but it's less understood that we're in a global freedom crisis, and that the years of 2020 and 21 may go down in history as one of those really important pivots in world history. Lots of us Americans love the year 1776, thinking that was a great year for the world and the future of freedom. Many who have lived under communism mourn the year 1917. Will future generations think about these years as pivotal years in world history? And if they do, will they be thinking about these years in terms of a loss of freedom, as that seems to be the conventional wisdom, that the new normal may have us less free than we were in 2019? But the point of the book is that this is not preordained. There's a lot of history that is going to be written in the months and years ahead. And I truly believe that the organizations that I feel so privileged to collaborate with all around the world, thanks to the role I have at Atlas Network, I think they're going to have a lot of influence over whether this decade will go down as one of increasing freedom or diminished freedom. I'll just describe how the book is structured. I believe that one way or another, we're going to get you a link where those of you in the audience can download a free copy of the electronic version of the book if you're interested. But the first section of the book is really about this community of nonprofit organizations, typically organized as think tanks or university centers that Atlas collaborates with. I'm going to quickly just share my screen to show a slide or two. Does that show up correctly? Pedro nodding? Okay. So the first section of this book looks at this community that the Atlas Network connects around the world. We have partners that are now in 97 countries, and you'll see that the combined annual budget of these organizations is now a shade over $1 billion when you put them all together. So it's not a marginal community. This is one that does have resources, although it's important to note that most of the organizations in our network operate with rather modest budgets. I think the median budget is about $280,000 or a little lower than that. They tend to have a staff of about 7 full-time employees. They're lean organizations that are often run as a labor of love. And if it seems unlikely that the world might be changed by such organizations, I put together a chapter that looks at some of the amazing improvements in human freedom that have happened over the past 40 years, where our partners played key roles in the end of apartheid, which our South African partners were on the right side of, helping to end hyperinflation in Latin America, the explosion in free market education in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the improvements in policing that happened in the United States that revitalized American cities in the 1990s, to some big changes in development economics, and an appreciation for the property rights for the poor. Growing respect for the need for entrepreneurial capitalism to create inclusive and lasting prosperity. These are big accomplishments, and the first section of the book really looks at the case that I like to make, that organizations like those represented in this call from Uruguay and Argentina and Spain can be cost-effective agents of change, and this should be better appreciated than it is. The second section of the book is about the state of the free society around the world today. And there I get to share some findings from the Global Index of Economic Mentality, which is a research project that Carlos Newland generously invited me to join. And he's going to speak about later in this presentation. We recently had published in Cato Journal a longer article. I think we can also share the link to that provides the details, and hopefully Carlos will go into some of those. In my book, I just cover some of the broader findings. And what I love about this project is that I've long thought that to really get people to appreciate the value of this community that I celebrate in section 1 of the book, we would love to be able to show that economic prosperity ties to economic freedom. And that is now pretty well established through a lot of empirical projects that have been done by the Fraser Institute, Heritage Foundation, World Bank, and so on. What we're looking at in this new project is whether economic freedom is best created and preserved by having a strong sense of economic mentality that favors free markets. That's what's studied in this global index of economic mentality. And I'd like to think that we may also be able to prove that over time, the think tanks that we collaborate with at Atlas Network have something to say about whether economic mentality moves in a more positive direction. I'll mention one other thing before I just discuss a couple of items from the Global Index of Economic Mentality to this last point about whether the think tanks can be effective in fostering change. There's a wonderful study that came out recently through the analytics team at Foreign Policy, where they looked at a large number of independent think tanks, many of them Atlas Network partners, and did a rather detailed study. The link is there at the bottom of the screen, navigatingthroughturbulence.com. It's where you can find the full study. And they really looked at the local think tank community and determined that they have managed to make positive impacts on governance, on addressing the decline of democratic norms, and so on, and helping to alleviate poverty, create more economic openness. So that's another interesting study. But to this point of the Global Index of Economic Mentality, I was grateful for this opportunity to contribute to trying to create an empirical tool to see how countries' populations think about the economy, about whether we need more government intervention to achieve some perceived lack of efficiency or perceived lack of fairness that comes from the market economy. This slide just shows the overall rankings of countries in this global index, where New Zealand tops our list as having the population with an economic mentality that is most aligned around free enterprise. I'm sorry to say for the Uruguayans on this call that we did not have World Values Survey data at the time of publication to include Uruguay among the countries in the sample. Looking at other countries in Latin America, you can see that Colombia and Guatemala were two of the better performers, or the best performers from Latin America. Mexico and Brazil were towards the middle, still in the upper half of the countries here. Argentina joined Chile near the bottom of the list. And for our friends in Spain, this is also sort of an interesting case, all the way down right next to Argentina and Chile at number 63. And I do worry that like Chile, Spain could be in that vulnerable position where the economic freedom that does exist in the country, perhaps it's more fragile than it might appear because of the lack of appreciation among the broad base of the public. So I'll be interested to see if Carlos has any more nuanced comments on that. I'll stop sharing my screen for just a minute. And I'll mention that to complement the sort of a brief introduction of findings from this global index that appears in the book, I wanted to study just in a more anecdotal way some of the thinking about challenges. Why does free enterprise have a negative connotation in different parts of the world? So I convened experts from 6 different regions and have transcribed conversations which appear as 6 different chapters in this book, really talking about the opportunities and challenges for liberalism as we come out of the pandemic. In Europe, we talked especially about how the Overton window, this range of opportunities for policy reform, has opened wider for both good and for ill in the wake of COVID, as the continent yearns for economic growth and more innovation, so it can kind of grow its way out of what could be another political crisis if the migration crisis of a few years ago returns and perhaps is exacerbated by this added dimension of COVID hanging over it. I think all of you on the call will find interesting the conversation about Latin America, which Roberto Salinas Leon was able to join. That conversation really centered on the destructive characterizations of capitalism that have allowed authoritarian populists to strangle much of the continent. Why do those mischaracterizations persist? And I'm not so arrogant as to think I have all the answers, but in the third section of the book, I looked at this question of, well, what are we going to do? And I truly do believe that the great joy of working at Atlas Network is that you get to see so many thoughtful people around the world with the right ideals who are struggling with this question. And I think we all need to have this conversation. But I did put out some of my best thinking about what the path forward looks like. So the third section of the book is in some ways very shaped by what I see in the United States, but I think resonates in many other countries. And that is a real opportunity that I think is emerging almost by virtue of how bad things have gotten. The polarization that we see in our politics has become so tribal and has moved so much to these extremes of socialism and right-wing populism that there's more room in the center for disaffected people who are just tired of the nonstop political warfare. And I think that the big challenge that we have in our freedom movement is to speak with more authenticity than we have in the past, to make sure that this non-committed audience knows that they have friends among them who believe in liberty, but at the same time are very pragmatic, that are very compassionate and very concerned for the well-being of all those who live in poverty, all those who have been marginalized in other ways. They need to know that what we want to see is a government that lives up to the idea of legal equality for all, because we believe in the dignity of the individual, and we believe that voluntary sectors of society, if they're allowed to innovate without government getting in the way, we can really achieve an inclusive prosperity. And this is where I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding that we all have to take some ownership of. This idea that the capitalism equals cronyism has festered. We need to show that authentic liberalism is truly opposed to cronyism, opposed to big business conspiring to trade favors with political elites. And this has been part of the message that we've been working on at Atlas Network during our 40th anniversary year, getting really intentional about how we talk about our work. If you visit atlasnetwork.org, I think you'll see that some of the new messaging is more welcoming to general audiences. I'd love your feedback on all of that. And I think that it's we have no excuse not to do better because we have great stories to share. I'll go back to sharing my screen for another moment just to show a couple of essentially story headlines that come out of the work that our network does. We love to celebrate how our partner in Indonesia was able to lower food costs for the poor by opening trade, removing protectionist restrictions that had been inflating the prices that poor Indonesians were paying out of rather modest monthly earnings in order to get staple foods that they could access easier from abroad. That's changing thanks to our partner. In Costa Rica, we had this wonderful story of the rollback of government granted privileges, these luxury pensions for veterans of political office that have been successfully rolled back by our friends in Costa Rica. In the US, the Mercatus Center helped our healthcare system, which was initially so unresponsive to some of the challenges of COVID, getting rid of some of these state regulations that inhibited how quickly we could ramp up capacity in different countries where we had a COVID crisis. in the middle of Africa, the very poor country of Burundi has seen some amazing advances in making it easier to legalize your business, easier to trade across borders. The conservation challenges solved by free market thinkers, and the core work of think tanks. These are some publications by our partner in Greece, which has been very innovative in how they get their ideas out to a much wider audience than would typically take an interest in classical liberal ideas. I'll stop there, but I hope that gives you just a taste of what I hope you'll also get from the book, which is a sense that this liberal community that we're all a part of has a really special opportunity to seize a moment of crisis that we see around the world and to help rebrand, redefine what it means to be part of the liberal movement. I hope you see how important it is to have organizations in Uruguay, in Argentina, in Spain that are doing this work on a daily basis. So I hope that those of you in the audience stay engaged on these topics, support them where you can, and help us all reshape a broader, better understanding of the free society. So I'll stop there and look forward to any questions and further discussion. But thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Brad. Very, very clear, very impressive presentation. Thank you so much for being here. Next, Isidoro Dara. I will introduce Isidoro Dara. Isidoro is a friend of mine. He's an economist that has devoted his professional life to international trade. He has had the chair of foreign trade at Universidad Hort, Uruguay for 3 decades. He was Uruguayan foreign trade negotiator from 1985 to 1989, and he has coordinated trade negotiation between Uruguay and the US from 2002 to 2004. Isidoro, thank you so much for your presence here. Please. Estás muteado, Jörg.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for the invitation, and particularly for the challenge of having to deal with the provoking thoughts from Brad. Thanks again also from Carlos, from Edgardo, and from Roberto. We will be hearing from them afterwards. This book is focused in the present and the future, but the author never hesitates to take a look back in time to get inspiration as to how better forecast what is coming. In particular, one of the best achievements was to look at 2021 as a year in which we may be coming out of a pandemic situation and compare it with 100 years before, when the world was also coming out of a pandemic situation with the Spanish flu, which was much more lethal than what we have today. It meant something like generating 3% of the death rate, whereas COVID has had only 300, under 4 million deaths so far. Okay, I have some problem. No, the problem is solved. So, by combining his view on the future and his sporadic, how we could say, inspiration from the past, Brad gives us a very good inception as to how liberalism or illiberalism will evolve in the next few years. Which was the target audience for Brad when he set to write this book? He says, people who believe in freedom as both a noble end in itself, both a noble end in itself and also the essential catalyst for producing other important outcomes: peace, prosperity, tolerance, cultural enrichment among them. These are the people that Brad aims at, should be reading this book. Others should be reading it too. And to do what he proposes to do, he analyzes what he describes as a movement centered on freedom and dignity. A movement across the world with many nodes, and he has the experience of being in part of that network for decades, and he reviews the great achievements of the liberty movement over 40 years, which is very interesting. We may not be conscious of those achievements. In fact, young people now who are never assisted to the failure of the real socialism experiment, which imploded in 1989. And therefore are not so aware of the challenges ahead. He then tries to make an examination of the state of liberalism in 2021 and starts by recognizing that free societies have fragile foundations. And unless those foundations are ingrained in values, we have a problem. Brad delves on the findings from the 2021 Global Index of Economic Mentality. Carlos will describe at length this index in the next few minutes. I do find a little lame the excuse that Uruguay is not examined because there was no recent results. We are dealing with values, and when we deal with values, the results of a poll taken 1 or 2 years ago are as valid as today. Normally, values take a long time to build up and also a long time to disappear. So 1 or 2 years of lack of information do not change the world. There are exceptions to these rules. The values of the Weimar Republic were demolished in a couple of years in the mid-30s. But it was how could we say, an evolution of cataclysmic proportions. Doesn't happen every day. So maybe next time, by taking a look at perhaps the results of last year or the year before the last, we could also include Uruguay into that index. And then comes the future. And that's a daring task, to try to discern the path forward for liberalism. We have to recognize there is a disruption for liberalism at the global scene, and one that reached biblical proportions. We have doubts about the US, Russia, China, the COVID virus problems, and And that doesn't mean we are doomed, but it does mean that we need to put our efforts in the right direction. What Brad sums up is there are a few very positive things going for liberal causes in the near future. Our pandemic was nearly at half as lethal as that of 100 years ago. Vaccines have appeared. Poverty rates are remarkably low compared to, say, 100 years ago. The good news are there, but we can have a promising future, according to Brad. I agree with that, if we do not undermine the values that sustain liberal democracy. And as Brad says, I also agree that we have what appears to be a crisis in values looming in the United States. And some pernicious ideas floating in the atmosphere. The people are sometimes misled into thinking that equality of results is a good goal. The right goal is to strive for equality of opportunities, and the results will come as opportunities, level playing field, are then shaped by individual efforts, preferences, and affinities. There is also another element Brad describes as a pernicious, and the idea floating in the atmosphere, it is a bias for government action. We have become, we humans, we democratic societies have become biased, believing that everything has to receive. I'm sorry? Sorry? Is it okay?
Is it okay? Go.
Okay, simply to finish, this Brad identifies as one of the threatening ideas that may give rise to illiberalism in the near future. I hope I have been faithful to your thoughts, Brad, in trying to close over the book. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Isidoro. That's very generous.
Thank you so much, Isidoro. It was a great pleasure to listen to you. Next, well, thank you very much, Professor Newland. Carlos Newland is Research Dean. Do you hear me? You hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Carlos Newland is Research Dean at the CEADE, a university based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He has been the Fortabat Fellow at the Rockefeller Center at Harvard University, and also Guggenheim Fellow. He has published articles in economic culture and economic history in different academic journals. Professor Newland, thank you very much for being here. Please.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you also to the SEMA, where I also teach, and to Edgardo. I'm going to try and share. I don't see if I can find the. Okay. So Can you see the map now? Okay. Well, this project, this section of Brad's book, which has also appeared in the Cato Journal just, I think, a week ago, is part of a research program established by the Atlas Network, where we had two different projects. One with Roberto Salinas and Juan Carlos Rocielo, that was nearly a Latin American project, trying to analyze influencers in the economic debate in all Latin America, and we added Spain and United States. These influencers, which we analyze through.
Professor?
Yes?
Sorry. A little louder, please.
These influencers, which we analyze through their impact in Twitter, are ideological entrepreneurs that are like surfing on an amount of followers that are based also on an economic mentality that exists in every country in the world. So it was quite interesting to analyze the contrast between US influencers and Latin American influencers. And we found it's interesting finding that the US is dominated, let's say, by more pro-government influencers like Paul Krugman and other people like that. And in Latin America, we have more of these more pro-market actors in Twitter. The other project was this project that already Brad spoke about, is trying to bring a new edition of a measure of economic mentality in the world. And there was somebody from Hungary, Paul Segleri, me from Argentina, and Brad from the US. And I think it's not because this did not happen without some justification. Why somebody from Argentina? Why somebody from Hungary? And why somebody? I believe, as Chesterton said when he spoke about Christianity, sometimes we are standing in the stomach of a giant, and it's so big we don't see the giant. And I think that happens with mentality. Douglas North, the great historian, economic historian, Nobel Prize, tried always to explain why some countries were rich, other countries were poor, and he looked at what determined institutions. And in the end of his life, his last books started to stress the importance of mentality, dominant mentality in countries. And for somebody coming from Argentina like me, it's always quite a shock, for instance, to hear American politicians speak about the economy and compare them to the Argentine politicians. Even the Argentines, let's say more pro-market politicians, never spoke much about the economy and about private initiative and competition. And that sort of thing we heard in America. So Argentina being in the extreme, we've been dominated by Peronism, which is a basically anti-market party ideology, and is still absolutely alive now. Perón acted in the late 1940s, and his ideas of government intervention in the economy are still applied in Argentina by current government. So that was maybe our motivation, try to understand how this or how was this mentality established and how strong it was in Argentina. Hungary is another interesting case because Eastern European countries, although they did the Iron Curtain fell, the people of those countries, after our initial, let's say, short pro-market stage, reverted into a very big appreciation of government intervention. So that was interesting. But what's interesting is that all Eastern Europe is changing fast. Maybe is the most interesting case of change in mentality in the world. Towards from a view in favor of government intervention to a view in favor of individual initiative, competition, private firms, etc., etc. So we built this Mappa Mundi, the global map of the world, which is not exact. It doesn't reflect the index, but I think it catches quite a lot, which shows that the world is divided by a big diagonal, anti-market diagonal, that is especially strong. Here we have only two colors, but especially strong in the southern cone, Argentina and Chile, and also Uruguay does a little bit better, but is part of this club of anti-market feeling. We didn't include any country. The index is based on the World Value Survey. This is a world private effort which is done, and it requires that the survey is taken in every country, and that there's some organization, private organization, that takes a survey in the country, which asks the same set of questions for all the countries that are included in the survey. And for us, it was really, we would have really liked to have data on Canada and on India. India is especially important, which wasn't in our initial data set, because of the future of India for the world. No, it will probably be the new China if it has good institutions, and it's growing fast if it gets to establish good institutions. But it's based again on a certain mentality, and we would have really liked to know what the results were for India. So you can see there is a diagonal, red diagonal, which is the parts of the world that are less pro-market. And let's say to one side of the diagonal, you have countries that are more pro-market, which are the Northern European countries, and I would say Eastern European countries today, they weren't before. And also the Anglosphere, the kind of English-speaking countries of the world, which have also, when you measure the people, quite high appreciation for private initiative and individual freedom, economic freedom. On the other side of the diagonal, again, you find a more pro-market region that many countries belong to what we call the Sinosphere, or yellow countries, if you want to call them another way, that have a big higher appreciation of free markets. Let me tell you, Japan, Taiwan, even Vietnam, which is still a communist government, but the people really favor free markets, and Australia, and of course, New Zealand. United States was always the big champion of a free market, and in our previous indexes, it appeared always first. This is not the case, and this is why I think it's interesting. Thinkers like Brad are seeing this, that something is changing, and we all see it as a result of their elections. What is the big change in the United States is that the younger people are much less free market than their parents. And that is translating in a way they are voting, and the politicians they like. The same is happening in even though New Zealand, even Northern European countries are very high in the appreciation of free markets, their younger generations tend to be less free market. So this seems to be something in which think tanks like the Atlas Network should be working on. Why these younger generations? We've all had personal experience. I was always surprised. I teach students who used to teach before COVID, students who would come from Buenos Aires from business schools in the States. And I was very much surprised how anti-market business students, we're not talking about students taking Latin American history, were compared to Argentine students. Perhaps I had a lot of numbers, but maybe this is more interesting, and then you can look at the numbers of the index in Brad's book or in the Cato Journal article. The other interesting case is, which is our region, Latin America. No? And in all our measurements, Chile, Argentina does very bad. It really, in its heart, people tend to be not pro-market. And this makes it very difficult because basically non-market policies don't work. Argentina applied now during COVID the most extreme government measures, complete shutdown, government intervention in the economy, and we've come out of this epidemic having the worst performance of the world. I think the world fell 3% or 4%. We're going to in GMP, and we're going to fall double. But perhaps what is surprising is the values we got always for Chile. And that shows how culture can be persistent. And that's interesting because it's difficult. If it's persistent, it's not difficult. It's not easy to change. And it requires big effort and time. That it is possible to change, we are seeing that in Eastern Europe. If we did if we ran the index only on young people, all the champions of pro-market champions of the world would be in Eastern Europe, in countries, ex-communist countries. Still, we are living in the world on our, let's say, mental capital of older generations and the states, but this may not be the future. So Chile, again, is quite interesting case because Chile has exactly the same mentality as Argentina, anti-market. And it had it in the last survey also 4 years ago. So when I went to Chile to present the index 4 years ago, practically I was very much criticized because it wasn't possible. Chile had gone through a market incredible transformation. It's incredible success. It now has abolished a great part of poverty. It is income per capita is higher than Argentina. And for Argentines, Chile was our poor brother from the other side of the Andes. Chilean women would come to work at our homes, cleaning the homes, because the wage difference was so great. This doesn't happen anymore. All the Chileans have got back to Chile and get much better jobs in Chile than what you could expect to get in Argentina. And so then at our index, the current index and the last index, in some way predicted what happened in Chile, which is like what's happened in Chile, and maybe is happening in the States, and this would be something we could discuss, is like the opposite to the fall of the Iron Curtain. There's a revival of those ideas everywhere. And even in New Zealand, the champion of this index, her prime minister, I think, is a great, at least does great lip service to socialism and was, I think, president of the Association of Socialist University Students. So, and this shows that the world, even if we can find difference in the index between those most pro-market and less pro-market, every country is in a relatively unstable position. I wouldn't say Argentina, because Argentina is very much anti-market, but other countries, given what the results in elections that have many parties and stable or unstable political alliances, can go to the left in economic policy or go to more freedom in the economic sphere. And that's also very well described by Brad, by the Overton window, which is, what are the possibilities of applying economic policy given this dominant economic mentality in every country? And we've seen in Chile, the economic reforms were not made by democratic governments, but by military governments, and they worked very well, and they were continued, but this was an unstable situation. And now I hope they won't reverse all their incredible transformation in Chile and economic stability and economic growth with the wrong economic policies. In Argentina, we couldn't do worse. We've just been falling, continue falling. And I hope that we are not an example of what may happen in some countries in the world. No? So this is why I think the work of the think tanks are incredibly important if they are aware of this cultural problem. The Marxist Gramsci said the battle was in the cultural sphere, and I think he was right. And it's going to be a lot of work, hard work, but it's really an action that is worthwhile for the world. I'm sorry I didn't show you. I had 20 slides of figures. I have them there, but I thought better telling you about this general panorama that the English index shows. Just a word of how the index was constructed. The index was constructed with some of the questions of the World Values Survey, which is taken now for 30, 40 years in the world. It's taken exactly the same survey every 4 years in most of the countries, and that work, we dealt with that data, and Alsegledi, who's an econometrician, an Austrian econometrician, made great work analyzing the data, which was very difficult, and we still have to work with surveys. I think with the new technical analysis of big data, maybe in the future it will be different, and we'll be more concerned with analyzing the incredible flow of information that happens in Twitter, in Facebook, in all the other social medias, and that express what the people's views on markets and the role of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Newland. We have 3 wonderful presentations. Thank you very much for all of you. Professor Odara knows a lot about the World Values Survey. He has been working on that for many years. Now, well, Roberto, are you there? You have some comments and questions, please. Roberto Salinas León is the director of the Center for Latin America of the Atlas Foundation, and he has a very long expertise. Roberto.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this conversation. I had the great opportunity to participate in a tangential basis or on a parallel basis in Carlos's work with the Global Index of Economic Mentality. Was delighted that Brad Lips gave it a vote of confidence and allowed us to be able to present it, and especially to feature it in this great work of his that he's put forward, the path forward that I think brings the type of spirit and also calling for why what we do at our institutions and civil societies and think tanks, not just throughout Latin America, but throughout the world, is so important for the cause of freedom and for the cause of the ideas of liberty. And I think it's very important that we take this approach, which is a bit of an intelligence based approach to the analysis of the pulses and the popular sentiment surrounding the ideas of liberty, precisely in this effort to rebrand the ideas of classical liberalism as ideas that are compatible with, not just compatible, but are absolutely necessary to achieve inclusive prosperity, to shift the debates about inequality, which tend to be polarizing and tend to be highly visceral, and rather talk about what the conditions are for greater social mobility, which is really what is most important for those families that are living in extreme poverty and in poverty throughout Latin America, but also throughout the entire world, to talk about what the sharing economy looks like, the impact of disruption and technologies, a proper understanding of what the process of creative disruption is all about, and especially an appreciation of the enormous benefits of global trade, despite the fact that we have persistent protectionist interests. In Latin America, at the center, we're very concerned about the impact on these pulses and these ideas derived from, let's say, an easy approach to monetary and fiscal policy, the fiscal looseness and this adoration with the myths of MMT theories, modern monetary theory. And an opportunity I had to interview John Taylor last year in our Liberty Forum and Freedom dinner, which was virtual. We both concluded, I sort of put words in his mouth, but he agreed with me that modern monetary theory is neither modern nor monetary nor theory. And if there are any countries that know about the pernicious consequences, especially for those that have the least access to resources and lower standard of livings, are precisely our populations in Latin America that went through the horrors of the lost decade in the 1980s, and now there are those, including voices such as Carmen Reinhardt, that are worried that a lost decade may occur again, because we're barely beginning to see the tip of the iceberg of the tremendous fiscal stimuli that governments in Argentina, in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico may have been an exception to the rule. Today, the United States talks about building back better and green energies and these transitions, without considering what the fiscal cost is for our generations and especially for future generations. So we've launched. If you see, I put a whole set of websites that you can check out, but we have a great product that we've launched at the center with one Uruguayan partner called the Macrovista Watch, and that is precisely designed to not to bring to the fore esoteric debates about macroeconomic policy, much as they might entertain many of us, but actually to place into the forefront of policy debate why fiscal excesses and why the abuse of fiscal stimuli can actually hurt rather than help our countries and our societies as we look forward to a sustainable post-pandemic recovery. I'm glad to say that in trying to achieve a delineation of this path forward in the rebranding of classical liberal ideas and the ideas of freedom, we've come up with certain products that have enthused our partners, many of our partners. And one in particular that we're very proud of is the Index of Bureaucracy in Latin America, which I put there, also the link to register. Please register. Please help us viralize this. I think this is an extremely important initiative. Some claim that with the undoing of the doing business of the world, that this somehow keeps alive the conversation. It by no means tries to replace it, but keeps alive the conversation. That the most important thing for small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in our Latin American countries is just simply to let me work. Déjame trabajar. Remove barriers to trade. This is not left. This is not right. This is not up or down. This is not ideological. It's just common sense. It is common sense economics, as James Courtney would put it, that allowing me to work, I can be Maoist in my most ideological heart, and still I'm going to want simple rules for a complex world that are predictable and that allow me to get ahead and not get trapped in that web of regulatory extortion that that many of our small and medium-sized enterprises today are caught in Latin American countries and also throughout the rest of the world. This work was inspired by our work of our Slovakia-based partner INES, that has been doing this index of bureaucracy for a number of years in Europe, measuring the time tax, the cost of the time tax. We are trying to go beyond that and say, well, this is also, let's keep alive the conversation that was first started by Hernando de Soto, Enrique Gersi, Mario Ghibellini, our Peruvian partners, and many other great works in Argentina and Chile and Mexico and elsewhere on the informal economy. And hopefully there will be a rebirth of some version of doing business in the world. But in the meantime, let's at least have the conscience to put into perspective how the expansion of the administrative state today represents actually an unlawful, as I think Philip Hamburger would say in his great work, and unlawful reaches into every aspects of our lives. Now, we didn't do this study, but we did facilitate this together with Se Dice Libertad, Instituto de Ciencia Política, México Evalúa, and we hope to add new partners in the future. Other works that we encourage you to see, to please sign up to our fantastic Mirada Sur newsletter. Martín Aguirre, that Pedro and many of you know very well in Uruguay, has been a great spokesman, interviewed Luis Lacalle Pou in our closing session at the Latin America Liberty Forum, in our virtual forum that we had back in June. Martin always gives us an Axio-style, smart brevity approach to, here in 7 minutes, you can find out in a very smart, very intelligent, very thoughtful, and thought-provoking way what is actually occurring in Latin America, including, by the way, debates about who's going to qualify or not to the World Cup. But we'll leave that for another Zoom opportunity. This is just a little taste of what we're doing in the Center for Latin America. And a lot of it was originally inspired by these conversations that we had with Carlos, that we had with Brad. I also welcome you to peruse our website and look for the paper on influencers in Twitter, which was a parallel investigation that grew out of this research that Carlos did. He was kind enough to include me as a co-author in that paper, and I very much like to be a co-author of that paper, though really, in truth, I simply only facilitated or created the conditions for this conversation to take place. But these are the types of works, these are the types of initiatives that I think are so important to keep that path forward alive. I love the way that Brad ends his book. I think it's on the right tone. We don't agree with the pessimistic, confrontational, apocalyptic end of the world. That we have to continually fight against the ideas of creeping statism and socialism. Yes, that has to be done, but we also have to be creative. We also have to be imaginative. We also have to be thoughtful in the way that we present these ideas. And sometimes that is harder. That is harder to do than just the easy way of attacking what we know in our hearts and minds is not the correct path forward for our societies. I'd like to quote in particular, I think what could be considered a controversial statement in this book, but I think is just the right note of how we should construe 2021 and also the years looking forward. This year is a year of optimism about the future. Time for courage and boldness among all of those who love liberty, peace, and hope. Our strategies for removing barriers to opportunity and unleashing the creative capacities of free people have worked in the past and will work again. We should demonstrate the confidence of our convictions. That's it. We should demonstrate the confidence of our convictions. That's what the Center for Latin America, I think, is all about. That's what motivates us. And that's what guides us in trying to delineate and determine what the path forward looks like for our societies. There are many challenges ahead. And I think that conversations of this kind are extremely important to keep that cautious optimism alive as we look into our post-pandemic recovery and we look into what the chances of the ideas of liberty have as we look forward into the future. So thank you, Pedro. Congratulations, Brad, on this work. Carlos, also for your great work and your collaboration with the center, and to everybody for participating in this forum.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Fascinating project. Mirada Sur and Martin Aguirre are great friends. He's very good. Brad, we have a question in the chat. We have 5 minutes to go, and I'd like to give. I'd like to introduce Jose Carlos Rodriguez. He is the executive director of Instituto Juan de Mariana. Jose Carlos, please, you have a comment, a question.
I would like to say just a few words. This is an important book for us, a book which is optimistic and for good reasons. It covers some great projects carried on by several think tanks around the world with meaningful impacts in their societies. We have, and the book also covers it, we have several challenges. I will only mention a few of them: right-wing illiberalism, the cancel culture and identity politics, and the demise of liberal values within the context of the pandemic. But I think that we can have the talent to face those challenges. And regarding Spain, and the results of the Index of Economic Mentality, by the way, and first of all, Brad, Carlos, congratulations for this project, which I think it will be very important in the future. For us, it's the example of Chile is very important. It shows how economic success doesn't necessarily mean political or institutional improvement or even stability. So we at Instituto Juan de Mariana know about the importance of the core values of a liberal society and the need to finding meaningful solutions for the problems of the people. So thank you, Pedro, for having us. And congratulations again, Carlos, Brad. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Jose Carlos. It's a pleasure for CESCOS, USEMA, Atlas Network to co-organize an event, this conference with you. Finally, we have 3-4 minutes to go. Brad, thank you so much for your time and presentation. We have a question in the chat. How is Atlas working with all those think tanks based in countries facing an increasing level of authoritarianism? Natalia says, institute that have worked so hard and after so many years of hard work are now suffering backlash. How do you feel about that? What do they say to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the real difficult challenges. I think that in the book, while I love Roberto emphasizing the notes of hope that we end on and that I think we really should be motivated by, I try also to be very sober in looking at challenges that seem to be sweeping much of the world. And for us at Atlas Network, it has been heartbreaking over several years to have gone from having some really engaged partners in China to having no engaged partners in China. They just cannot exist. They were closed down. They had their doors barred shut. In Afghanistan, we had some real restless nights in August, trying to help our friends find paths to safety. But much like our friends in Venezuela, these individuals who have really put their lives on the line for our values that provide, I think, a real source of hope. So at the same time that we're discouraged, that we've been on the retreat in some places, the Afghanistan Economic and Legal Studies Organization is reopening some of its educational programming. They're doing it now from Turkey. But these individuals who had to leave all their material possessions behind in Kabul are remaining very focused on the cause that they dedicated their lives to. And certainly our friends at CEDICE and others in the network who have been struggling through the hard times in Venezuela for decades now. While it's discouraging that there's not been more progress in difficult countries, I think that also provides us with a lot of perspective about what we need to protect in our countries where we have free institutions, where we can have these conversations. Helps us remember what we should not take for granted, and should make us a little more determined to advance where we can advance. So I hope that that we don't get too discouraged by all the ways in which the glass can look rather half empty in 2021. I hope that it makes us that much more determined to refill the glass, because there are some positive trends that we can exploit. And certainly it's self-defeating if we don't really take stock of where we can draw strength from and where we can do a better job at messaging our ideas to audiences that I think are really yearning for a new narrative more now than ever before.
Very clear. Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you so much for Brad, Carlos, Isidoro, such a honor for CESCO, for USEMA, Instituto Juan de Mariana, to listen to you, to work, to organize a conference with you. Carlos, Isidoro, you have a final comment, a final question? We are finishing at 4:15 Montevideo and Buenos Aires time. Do you have any final comments?
For me, just to say it's been an extraordinary experience to work with the Atlas Network. I'd never worked before, and in some of us in Latin America work, although we've taught in Europe, in university in Europe and the States, we work in quite an isolated way. Our economies are not very important for the world today. They're quite small, and it's been a great honor and privilege to work in this project. It really opens your mind, and it's the sort of things that these networks do. They allow collaboration to flourish into projects and ideas and debate. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Newland. Isidoro, do you have a final comment?
Very final. We just agreed with Carlos to follow up on elements of judgment that appeared during this conversation. And thank you again for the intellectual challenge. We will continue in touch.
Thank you so much. Brad, you finished. Thank you so much, Professor Newland, Professor Odara, Jose Carlos, thank you so much. Edgardo, thank you so much. Roberto.
Thank you.
Brad, you finished. Thank you so much, Brad.
No, thanks. It's been a great experience. So I appreciate all of you putting this together, and what a privilege to work with you all on a lot of projects and challenges ahead. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure.